Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 86. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cody, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, John, I'm doing great, but I have this really anxious feeling because I want to know what happens in part 2 of this interview. We'll get there, though, right?
Yep.
We're both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
All right, Nick. As you alluded to, this is part 2 of 2. Our interview with Cody D. Arkland and his discussion of, so much stuff, so much good stuff. But I want to say, the emotional part of a technical career. Kind of kicking off with the issue of dealing with somebody who's going through like an anxiety, point in their lives, an anxious point in their lives, and how to be an effective listener. I think we wrapped up the last episode with that, but we're also starting this one with it.
I think the phrase of this episode, and if you're listening, you'll get it when you hear it, is mental plot twist. Yeah,
I like that too. All right. Well, without any further ado, let's get to Cody D. Arkland on the Nerd Journey Podcast.
I was going to ask 2 questions, Cody. Let's see. Maybe you and John should both take a stab at answering. You mentioned the circle of trust or the circle of people that you would show weakness to. Do you feel like it's probably going to contain more people that are outside your...
More often than not, for me at least, my wife sees a part of me that no one else ever gets to see, period. That's just, and I think that's how it's supposed to be, right? I think that for this kind of stuff, the stuff we're talking about here, there's a guilt that would come along with that she would feel around some of it, right? Like when we branch off from talking about career and we get into like stuff I've dealt with as a kid, I grew up very poor. I had a very rough go coming up in the world. I moved a lot of times. Similar story to a lot of people. I've never tried to match childhoods with everyone. We all have organic damage, right? But having conversations about how hard it is now would carry a level of guilt with her. And we've had this talk. Like she knows that there are people that hear about struggles that she doesn't always hear about. And I'm always open to tell her. And I've told her, hey, if you want me to have that talk with you, I will. That's fine. There's no secrets here. But we go to people for the support we need. And people who work in vendors understand the vendor struggle. My wife's a teacher. Like, she's never carried quota. She doesn't understand what customers are like, right? So I think the important thing there is if I wasn't clear with her that was happening, I would feel dishonest. So I don't feel dishonest about it. I think that my inner circle, when it comes to the stuff we're talking about on this, and things that blend in and out of it, generally doesn't involve anyone from my family.
I think my response is kind of, twofold. Your family has baggage with you that colors all of those conversations that isn't necessarily fair. And I'm thinking about like parents and siblings. When you're talking about like a partner, like, husband and wife, then I think that exactly what you said, Cody, about being honest about the problems and saying, hey, I'm having these issues and I'm probably going to go talk to the people that, can,
empathize.
Yeah, most and best empathize rather than me having to give you the background. And also, like, the second part of this is to burden the relationship with everything, right? Because your partner, your partner shouldn't be your therapist too, right? They shouldn't have to deal with 100% and like in like, I don't want to treat my wife like a stress doll where I say, here's all the things that happened to me and here's all the things that, like, I'm feeling bad. Oh wow, it was really, I feel really great now that I've unburdened myself, and now she's walking around with all of that, right? And I don't think that that's fair to put on any one person. So to spread it around, and I would say, if I was having car problems, like, I wouldn't burden my wife with, the things that are going on with my car. I'd talk to my mechanic about it, right? And I just let her know, hey, this is the stuff that's going on, and then go see my mechanic, right? And I probably feel that same way about, professional, like, therapy, um, and psychiatry, even, or group, like, support sessions, informal, formal, and also, spiritual, like, whatever, like, theme or, like, flavor of that, is most appropriate for the person. Like, you need to figure that out, but not figuring it out is the main problem.
Well, I think something interesting happens when we all have emotional maturity levels, right? We're all figuring ourselves out at different paces, and different aspects of ourselves we learn at different points. And I think that, like, when you figure out the type of person, like the type of people you need for a specific type of conversation, that's like a big thing for you. Because, like, I'll use some names. Um, when I need to talk about like family and religion and stuff like that, Brian Graff, 100% of the time. Like, that's my dude for that. We have, like, we've talked a lot about that stuff. That's just, he's my trust circle for that. What I go to for someone like John Schulman is a very different conversation, a very different thing. That's more about like relationship stuff and how my relationship is and struggles in that. When you can start to figure out where your trust circle isn't like everybody gets all of it, right? You have to go to who is going to help you with the part you need the most help with. Um, and there's different people for that. With these deep conversations like we're having here, Grand Orchard is my dude. Like, we had these conversations about how to deal with imposter syndrome, how to deal with like anxiety fears, or at least he knows about mine, right? Like, he doesn't necessarily have like the same kind of anxiety struggles I have. But like, when you start to figure out the people in that trust circle that you can go to and have those dialogues with, it's a great thing. Conversely, when you haven't reached that maturity level and you haven't figured that out, you shotgun it everywhere, and there's collateral damage everywhere, because you're almost in like a desperation mode where you're like, I contain it as long as I can, and then it explodes, and whoever's in the shrapnel catches all of it, whether it's my wife, whether it's a bad day with the kids, whether it's somebody, like anybody who hears me at work and opens their ear for a minute, they just catch it all, and they don't understand context, they don't understand history, they just catch the unfiltered, unprocessed rah of it all. But when you start to figure out the load balancing thing, that's why I made that comment when you were talking. Like, you start to figure out where the load goes best and what tool is best for the job. You start to be able to have a lot more logical thought of like, okay, I'm having a hard time about this today, I'm going to go to this person.
I knew you were going to bring it back to Envoy somehow.
Envoy's a proxy, John. Okay.
All right.
It can load balance, but tools for the job.
All right. Yeah. So, everything has its, technical counterpart. And every time you were talking about not offering, fixes, I kept on saying, oh, like a pull request. Oh, like a pull request. Oh, like a pull request. But I
It's true,
managed to
right?
keep it
Yeah.
in until just now.
No, but I
So,
mean, it's a good comparison, because like,
mhm.
if you look at how, like, if somebody pulls a GitHub issue, they usually have the skills to fix that issue, right?
Right.
Like, it's not like everybody jumps on that same issue, right? Somebody who knows how to fix it pulls that issue and closes that PR. I think that it's hard to know what's the right problem at a given time, right? Like, I think that we firefight to a certain extent as much as we can. Um, these days, like, the fire that I fight, again, I believe in being transparent in these conversations, because if somebody hears this, hopefully they figure out something about themselves. The struggle I fight with today, and like the thing that I like, imposter syndrome isn't something that hits me every day anymore. I think I've figured out a little bit about how my brain works. And while it creeps in every once in a while, it's not in the forefront of my head. What I struggle with now is feeling included, and not in the macro sort of way. What I feel like now is like, hey, I want to be this person. I want to be this person who has the skill and is recognized this way. And I'm afraid that I'm not seen that way anymore. You know, I left VMware where I had a good reputation. I had a lot of friends. I was very active in the community, and it's been hard. It's been a different thing to go to HashiCorp, where I'm happy. I love HashiCorp as a company. Life is good, um, but it's hard to not feel as included anymore. And it's not anyone's fault. Like, no one's done anything wrong. I've not seen a tweet and been like, oh, that wasn't fair. That's purely inside of Cody. And this is like a Cody thing that Cody's working through. I'm less afraid of people figuring out that I don't belong anymore. I'm more afraid of not being invited anymore, or not being invited now, which is a whole nother series of years to unpack in itself.
No, I think that kind of thing can happen. Like, even, I would say, changing a company, the vendor that you work for or the organization that you work for is a big version of that. It can happen even if you make a transfer within an organization, right? So if you had a role on the West Coast and you move to the East Coast, and you're getting completely away from the people that you know and who trusted you, and now it's like pure reputation, and people have heard about what you can do but haven't seen it firsthand, then it's a scaled down version of that. But changing the company that you work for completely, changing all your coworkers, walking away from your reputation and all that inertia is one of the reasons why changing companies to work for is so difficult. It's one of the barriers, and actually it's one of the reasons why we ask for more money when we are comfortable working in a place, and we leave all that behind to go to a new place, even if it's the exact same role, because we're walking away from our network, we're walking away from all the political connections that we had, and we have to face all of this unknown and work through all of this stuff. We need compensation for it. That's not really what we're here to talk about, but it is one of those like factors that we talk about when we talk about making job changes. So, but I do understand exactly what it is that you're talking about. I think, well, I went through like an analogous version of that, right? So I left VMware and went to Google Cloud. I changed, companies. It's the same role, but I changed all of my customers. None of my coworkers are the same. I took on two fairly new sales reps at Google Cloud, and changed industries. Right. So, there's like a whole bunch of changes at once, and it's like, oh, that might have been one too many changes. Like, I don't know exactly what I was thinking there,
And it's not
But
something that you like, to your point, like, it's not something that you like, you're not like, I regret doing this, but it's like, there's things that you probably still would have taken the job, but there's thought processes that you would have prepped yourself for. Like, I wish somebody would have sat me down, honestly, like, being fully blunt. I wish somebody would have sat down and be like, hey, Cody, I think going is a great choice for you. I think this is going to be really good for you, but I want to let you know what your brain's going to do after this, because I feel like it probably happens to everybody. Like,
Mhm.
the first time you leave a vendor, I'm willing to bet this happens to almost everybody. I wish somebody would have sat down and been like, you're going to go in and you're going to do a hard reset on who you are in an organization. So all this stuff that you don't worry about now, the fact that like you stopped asking for vacation a year ago, you just let people know when you go out, like, all of that kind of stuff changes. Like, all that stuff resets. And so prepare your brain for the fact that like it's not going to hit on day one, but in about 2 or 3 months in, you're going to wonder why you weren't invited on that conference call that you think you should have been invited on. And that's because you've been reset. Here, everyone knows that you should be on that call, and everybody wants you on that call, and you've demonstrated value that says you can be on that call. No one knows about that here. So don't take it personal. Just know it's going to happen. And here I am, leaving my first vendor gig, going to a new one, and struggling with that transition, and kind of the unexpected, the unexpected like mental twists, the mental plot twists of that.
Sure.
If somebody had sat you down and said that about going to Google Cloud and said, hey, like it's going to be a big reset, maybe you'd still feel that way, but you would have been prepared for it. You would have been like, you
Sure.
know what? Somebody told me this was a thing. I can get through this. It's going to be okay. Like, I can get through this. Instead of like experiencing yourself and being like, wow, maybe that was one too many, just to your point, maybe that was one too many things there. That's kind of rough.
Well,
Uh,
I mean,
so,
I think you said it earlier, right? Like, and this is like a slightly different analogy, but if somebody gives you directions and they say, hey, this turn comes up really fast, so you want to slow down, and they draw the map for you perfectly, that's not the same thing as you driving down that road and go, oh wow, that came up really fast, but it was helpful, right, to have gotten all the warnings, and hopefully that's something that we're doing for people here is giving them some of those warnings and the pitfalls that we went through, going through these kinds of changes,
or
and
being the reverse, right? Not to,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you there, but like I want to flip it around and say the reverse way. Maybe someone will listen to this and be like, hey, I know my friend John is changing jobs, right? I heard this. I heard Cody, John, and Nick talk about this. I need to tell him about this because I went through this and that sucked. like it's also the reverse, right? That maybe someone will hear this and feel related and they'll feel like I'm not weird for feeling this way, but maybe someone else will hear this and coach differently. Someone will become a leader. Someone will stand up and have a conversation with someone that no one else has had yet, and that's a beautiful
Right.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
That just goes to show you that no one can be told what the Matrix is.
No one can. It's super true. It's a great analogy. So it's staying at VMware the blue pill or the red pill?
Ooh.
Tune in another time.
So, Cody, let's talk about that change and the move to HashiCorp. I'm really curious about what made that the most attractive option at the time.
So first thing out of the gate, like HashiCorp was a company that like I had a ton of admiration for, that I had like played with their tools, worked with their tools, really liked what they were doing. I had a colleague who had already gone over there and had amazing things to say. They're very up and coming, like we all know HashiCorp. Like they're a very up and coming company. They're doing really cool stuff. I felt like it would have been a really good thing for my career. There was definitely sacrifices that were made, like on the altar of financial. That just different company, different style, different establishment. Um, but I felt like for my resume, it was a good choice, and the space I was going to be working in was a good space to be involved in. Uh, so that from like the initial thoughts, initial reasons, that was very much why. I will say that like on an emotional level, there was, leaving cloud management and going into the Kubernetes team at VMware was a big like shock for me. Um, I didn't really like think a lot about what it was going to be like to change groups that way, and especially inside of VMware, like I had a lot of respect for the cloud management group. I liked the team. I liked the people I was working with, and it was hard to not be involved in those conversations anymore, but still see them happening behind the curtain. Um, and I just it was a tough thing for me to get past. I don't have the wisdom to say why right now, uh, but it was really hard for me to move on from that group, start over internally. Kind of, John, you talked about this idea of changing teams and the similar thing happening. It was hard to figure out how to get involved in the new space. There was a lot of change in the Kubernetes team at VMware at the time, with Pivotal coming in. A lot of instability. Because of how I grew up, I have a hard time with instability. Like just ABC's of Cody, instability is a trigger for me. Like when things feel stable, I am good. When things organizationally feel very unstable, I am the worst version of myself. Like I had a lot of instability growing up, so that follows me into my career. I felt very unstable, not mentally unstable. I felt unstable in my role. I felt like I didn't know what was happening with it. There was a lot of like, well, we'll see how things are in a couple of months, and I just couldn't. That's not for me. That's not my speed. So that mixed with the opportunity, like I wasn't running away from VMware at all. I had found the opportunity for HashiCorp. I was like, man, this sounds like a great gig. It was working in the service mesh space. Career wise, like Kubernetes and service mesh is a very big part of all of our future in some way. Just felt like it was the right lines for the resume, but then couple that with the instability I was already feeling. it was just the right move at the time. I would definitely make the move again now, even with like the clarity I have now, several months later, being removed from the situation. It was the right move for me at the time. I feel good about it now. Hope that answered the question. Did I answer the
Yeah,
question?
absolutely.
Okay,
And
cool.
since you've been in technical marketing for a while now, are there ways that somebody who's an individual contributor, like maybe customer, they work at a customer, they work system administration, help desk, are there things they could be doing to get to that point? If that sounds something that's attractive to them?
Yeah, I think that the biggest advice I give people is that people respond differently to different types of content. I think that there's old school tech marketing that focuses very much on like presentations and white papers. I joked about this earlier. Um, but when you start to figure out that maybe John responds really well to like video type content, and maybe Nick responds very well to blog type content, and you're able to say this topic plays really well in this medium to this group of audience, um, start to build that gear in your head. Start to look at what you want to talk about. Like, and you can do this as part of the community, right? You don't have to do this in tech marketing. If there's a blog that you want to write, ask yourself, is this best for a blog or should I do a video on this? Are more people going to consume this? More people that I want to consume this going to consume it via like a 10-minute demo video or 10-minute video, a blog, both, a deck, something like start to identify what the best medium for the message you're going to be transmitting is and what that message is. Is the message meant to get somebody excited about using Ansible? Is the message about getting them excited to solve provisioning a VM? Like, what's the message you're going for here? Because sometimes that message is how to install Kubernetes end to end. Sometimes that message is how to install console end to end. Sometimes that message is Ansible is cool for automation. Here's why. And those are all three very different messages. So when you're writing content in the community, start to figure out what the message you're communicating is and who you want to consume it and how best to consume it. And make your shifts based on that. From a career standpoint, that's going to be super attractive to someone who's hiring into that role. If I'm looking at a resume for somebody who's coming onto my team and I can see that they've put thought into why they did videos, why they did a podcast, why they did a blog, as opposed to just, I did these three things, um, that is like the mindset that I'm really interested in. When somebody like is able to take apart and say, I was going to do this as a blog, but I did it as a video for these 5 reasons. Even if I disagree with those reasons as Cody, the fact that they put thought into it and they pivoted away from a blog because of that speaks volumes. The other thing I'll say, and this is like kind of attached to the answer, look at your projects and how you would reflect them later, right? Like one of the best things I ever did in a career interview was building like a portfolio around some of my work and being able to reference the different types of work that I built and why they were built that way was impactful. And it made me feel confident. It made me feel like I do belong here. I do belong in this role because I thought about this and I was able to put it in a binder and show it to somebody. So approach the projects you work on both in the community and at work in that way. How can I showcase this in an interesting way? I tell people to do this with their home labs, right? Like people always feel weird about putting their home labs on their resume. Put that on there. Like you absolutely should put it on there. Have a good reason why it's there. Don't just be like, I built a three node vSAN cluster for fun. Like, why did you build it? What did you learn out of it? What is it there for? What did you use it for? Like, what did you learn? Include that stuff. Because like when I see that, I think this person cared enough about their career to go and build this on their own, and they had specific things they achieved that they achieved well enough to put on a piece of paper. Sold. Great. Good to go.
It sounds like you have a high value for the philosophical backing and grounding for projects, not just the projects without any of that context.
100%. Yeah, that's a great way. I've never thought of it that way. Thank you, John.
Well, but what you're really doing, to John's point, is you're looking at it through the lens of how can this be highlighted on my resume for technical marketing. Like that's the way you presented it.
Yeah,
This is great.
I think it is, but I think it's. I guess the macro message here is think about the actions you take and how you want them represented, right? So even if it's not tech marketing, right? If you're going for an SE role, if you're going for an architect role, think about the things you're doing and how those are reflected, and more so how you want them to be reflected. And we can take this back, like it goes back in a funny way, totally unexpected, to our conversation about like the imposter syndrome. Think about the actions you take as part of who you want to be known as. I'm probably not known as the fall apart guy. I might be afraid of that, but the actions I've taken don't speak that. Like the actions I've taken speak that I'm a nerd who likes to talk about the tech I do, who likes to help people along, who's very friendly and kind and approachable. That's actually my brand, not the thing I'm afraid of it being. And anyone who disagrees with that and says my brand is something else, it sounds cruel. I probably don't want them around anyways, right? Like if they don't recognize the person I want to be, uh, and they only recognize that negative part of me, they don't belong in my circle anyways. Ooh,
I
dropping
was
truth bombs at the end.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, just a reflection again. Like I would say, probably a brand is more about being a nerd and like debugging these problems, like whether they're technology problems or like emotional problems or brain problems, right? It's like
That is a cool
it's
way to say that. I like that.
yeah, like deconstructing, and I think that like more of us who have that like engineer brain, like should treat like emotional issues that way too, right? As like a, well, if this were a technology problem, how would you approach it? Like, are there root causes? Like, can you peel away layers? Can you deconstruct it? Are there two problems that are interacting with each other and magnifying? Like, all of these things are natural processes that we already have. We just don't apply them to ourselves. Well, first of all, applying it to yourself is very difficult. And sometimes you don't have that perspective, right? And sometimes you just need somebody else who has like an outside view who can reflect back like all the things that you're saying, and then that'll give you the perspective to use your brain in that way.
I think that's an incredible observation that like is like something I'm gonna I can tell I'm gonna think about this for the next couple of days, because I think that like as an engineer, we have like the good book of engineering, and the good book of engineering says like when you see a problem, look at what caused it, look at what's going on in the background before you try to fix it. But I think we all know the truth of the matter is as soon as you see a problem, you're already thinking about what you can do to solve it without even understanding the background of it. You're automatically thinking like, all right, I've seen this happen before, here's what I can do to fix it. And you can't put this on your resume, but you probably try those things and then they don't work. And then you go look at the root cause of it and you start to dig into what actually happened and you think, oh, it really was DNS again. Great. That feels awesome. It really was. It was always DNS. It can't be DNS because why would I mess that up? But it turns out I did anyways, right? And it's interesting, like to take that same thought process and apply that to how you deal with people. As engineers, we always want to fix the problem. So when we jump in to give advice to people and we jump into conversation, we always want to solve that problem. But if we treat it as an engineer and we tell ourselves to go by the good book and decompose the problem and start to take apart that problem first, like if Nick and I, or John, you and I are having a conversation, and instead of jumping in and solving your blue screen of death, if I actually was like, hey, let's unpack this a bit. Like I want to hear what happened. Let's talk about the day before we got here. Let's like the movies that we all enjoy when it starts at the end and then like they say 3 weeks before and you're like, how could this have happened in 3 weeks? What tell me more, right? Like if we approached it that way as people and we started to decompose the stuff that happened, same thing in our relationships, right? Like we talk about, you guys mentioned at the beginning of this is about careers, but like you talk about how you address this in friendships and relationships as well. Let's take the problem and let's look at the hour before, the 2 hours before, the 6 hours before. Let's decompose this before I even jump into trying to solve it for you. And maybe this takes us 3 days to get through like all of that, but I'm not going to try to solve the problem without all the data and without all the facts, because in reality it might just be DNS. It might just be opening up a port. Like it could be something very simple, or it could be something way more complex, and that simple solution that I had in my head is actually like really hurtful to present.
Well, I remember hearing this thing. I don't remember which book it was from. Maybe it was The Soul of a New Machine, because that's how old I am. Something about like the sooner you start coding, the longer it's going to take to like actually build your software. And it's like the the same thing goes for like diagnosing technical problems, right? You like somebody starts giving you, symptoms, and if you just start fixing those symptoms, like you're not actually going to get there. It's like, wow, my app is like, okay, well, let's increase the memory on your machine. Oh, it's not. No, actually, it was okay. Well, maybe it's the problems with your keyboard, and we'll swap that out. Like that's not actually an effective way to solve like a help desk type problem, right? Like so the idea that we would do that for much more complex systems like human emotions and friendships and like the way that we interact with our coworkers, I mean it's just ludicrous, but that's how we like by default approach those kinds of problems. Again, ludicrous, right?
And
No, but
we're just taking everything out of context by not backing up a little bit and taking the time to understand the full picture.
Yeah,
it totally is true, and it's like man, it's funny, when we had the emails about coming on and doing this podcast, I had like the thoughts that I wanted to get out, right? The things that I want to say. But I actually think that like what we've kind of naturally uncovered here in probably the last 5 minutes, like this is the real important stuff, right? Like what like we've stumbled on here is actually like the thing that probably matters the most. And like it goes back to that value of listening, but it's why are you listening? You're
mm-hmm.
listening to really understand the full scope, like what you just said, Nick. Like it's really to understand the full scope of what this thing is, because like how can you ever solve it if you don't actually understand what it is? And to your point, John, like this is complex human emotion. This is career, like putting it in. It's not always about like the night I spent crying upstairs because it was a hard day, right? That's a sad thing. But these choices can have impacts on your career, right? What if like I know of 4 stories off the top of my head of people who on the spot dropped, I quit, I'm out of here, because of things like this, like because they just didn't have a good outlet to talk about it, right? And like those things follow you around, and we don't like to say that. We like to say that you can always have another chance to make it better, but like that next interview you have where you have to explain why you dropped is going to hurt your confidence. Even if they don't care, it's going to hurt your confidence. You're going to be worried about it. It's going to affect your ability to execute in that situation. uh, these choices and the lack of being able to have these conversations can have real career impacts on you if you don't approach it accordingly.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I don't know that we actually had you on to talk about anything else. Like this is, I think, 100% the goal of having you on was to uncover this type of stuff. These insights. Whether they're career oriented or relationship, friendships. It all tends to like interact with each other. All together. So I feel like if we can help people debug their personal relationships, that's going to be positive on their careers. And if they can, debug themselves, then, not to put it too crassly, like, just iteratively fix each other, like
You know what's
we're going to be a
it's
better
funny.
community.
I'm gonna lean in on this analogy because I think it like fits really well. Um, every once in a while, I'll get if you guys follow me on Twitter and you actually read the stuff I put out there, you'll see every once in a while I'm pretty like transparent about like hard days I've had or like emotional things. And I've gotten no one's ever asked me in like a rude way, but people sometimes be like, "Man, like, do you ever feel weird just dumping that stuff out there?" And I'm like, "Yes, 100% of the time. Like, this isn't like it's not normal to like dump like your deep dark fears on social media. Like maybe on like hidden behind like other family Facebook or something like that. That's the place you do that. But like on my job ones, like no, it's not super normal. But what I care about is the person who doesn't understand this stuff yet about themselves. It's the person who like is angry all the time and is frustrated all the time because they haven't figured out how to talk about this yet and they haven't found anyone who talks about it yet. Like I want that person to stumble upon me being like transparent about this stuff. Uh, and it is a form of therapy to be able to talk about. So where I'm going with this, like leaning into the analogy, is log outputs, right? Like debugging is a million times easier when you have good verbose logging. So like the way I dump this stuff out is my own version of logging and it's problem correlation. So that when somebody's stuck and somebody's in a rough spot, they can go back and look at the logs of other people who have had these problems and see like, wow, so like he had this thing happen, he dropped this blog post, and he ended up at this job, So like his world didn't end because he went on a tangent about his imposter syndrome. No one judged him. In fact, there's like 140 comments about people who are positively supportive and who are good, who are good natured about it, who have talked about their own. Maybe I could reach out to him and ask him about that. And then they get a bigger log dump of more conversations that have happened around it. Like that's what I want. Like it's super weird to put this stuff out on Twitter. I feel like there's people who read it and are like, look who's screaming for attention again. Cody's screaming for attention again. It's not for them. What it's for is for people who like haven't figured out how to talk about this stuff yet, or who are too scared, or who are in positions that don't let them, like maybe career paths that aren't as tolerant of mental health, so they just don't feel alone. People feeling alone is the worst. I grew up moving. I moved probably 11 times inside of a 6-year period. Feeling alone sucks, and it follows you around for the rest of your life. If I can dump my purse out on the table a few times with my feelings and have a couple people feel less alone, more power to it. I'm good for that. Right? You can't open the stuff that you see what's in the purse. You can't open the things that are inside. There's some cool stuff there. So
Verbose logging. I really like that. So I think I was talking to my wife, and I mentioned that I have this metric or a series of metrics that I use to monitor my like mental health, like what time in the day did I take a shower, and what time did I get in bed, and what time did I fall asleep, and maybe this is just part of like the I don't remember exactly what the community is called, like the something about like the measured life, and people like use like sensors and stuff to like measure everything, like things like amount of sleep and things like that. So it was just like this association, that triggered when you said, verbose logging. That is one thing that I do not do. I watch my metrics, but I don't publish them to the world, and it's just fascinating. That's something that you're accepting and taking on yourself. Kudos to you.
I think it's for me it makes me feel better, right? Like it's my own way of like self therapy, right? And not everyone responds that same way to that. Like I don't think everyone should do that. I think it's about what makes you feel good. No one should feel anxiety about doing things like that. I feel, do I feel silly doing it sometimes? Sure, but I can say I never feel anxiety about it. But when I did the imposter syndrome blog post, I did. I felt like people are going to read this and they're going to be like, Cody just worries too much. Um, that was the only time, and the response back was so positive that I just knew like I'm never going to feel anxiety about doing this again. uh, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's all about what makes you feel better, right? For me it makes me feel better. If it doesn't make you feel better, it's cool.
No, so just feeling vulnerable, I think is something that we in general avoid. But if that is also a source of strength for you, then I think that's amazing. If you can turn your weaknesses into strength.
Right. We're all trying to figure out how to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you're doing is you're setting an example of what good looks like to build up not only yourself, but others. I like it.
Thank you, guys. Makes you feel good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big fan of reading them, but I mean, I'm glad that's something. No, I'm just kidding.
He
just
actually
kidding.
prefers video form.
Yeah, I prefer the video form. If you could,
You actually pegged it right on. I think John would rather have the video, and I'd rather have the written word.
Yeah, we had a side conversation going, and I was like, "How does he know that about us? How does he know that I'm watching all this video?" And
This guy does his research.
How many of our episodes has he listened to?
It's tech marketing,
that doesn't
guys.
make any sense.
It's tech marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to absorb, and you have to know. Just like if you're an SE, you just have to say back the thing that the customer said to you and sound like super insightful.
Or sell more VROPs.
Sounds super insightful.
One or the other.
Sounds like you could use a monitoring tool for this.
We can sell you DevOps.
Wow.
I think my final question for you, Cody, would be, how do you figure out what's next in your career? After all the stuff we talked about, all the different ways you've incorporated these things and accepted them as a part of you, how do you figure out what you want to do next?
God, I said this to someone recently, like careers and lives are like seasons, right? And you learn to like see the different seasons as they're approaching. Like it's easy to say that summer starts in June, but like I say summer starts when it gets really, really hot. And yeah, there's a formal first day of summer, but like to me, summer really kicks in when I'm like it's 107 and this is horrible. Um, so I think that like what's next is probably the least of the concern. It's more like when is next, right? Like, is it is it time? Um, when I feel like I can't be my vulnerable self anymore, when I feel like people aren't responding to that, or when I feel like I'm not getting the support that I need organizationally, that's like one trigger. I don't make like a decision based on that. Uh, as you know, as a nerd, I'm on it, and I use that phrase. I want to be like transparent about that. Like, I use the phrase "I'm a nerd" as like a positive thing, right? So like, no
Sure.
one should
Yeah.
ever feel like it's a negative thing.
We always take it as a positive
Yeah, I
thing
think that
on
like
Nerd Journey.
it's a good time to be a nerd, right? Like, there was a time where it wasn't, and it is now. Uh, but I'm a nerd. I watch the market. I watch like what's happening with the products I work on. Am I on the right track technology wise? And I don't like jump off of that without like thinking a lot about it. These days, I care a lot more about the way I'm treated. I care more about like the leadership beliefs. I care more about um, what the company is actually trying to accomplish, less about like the individual tech. I have to like what I'm doing. I have to love the tech I'm working on. Absolutely. I probably weigh that more now in my life than I ever have before, in the sense of like being super happy with what you do, not so much the job title aspect of it. Like the work you're doing is so important. Like I could go back to being an SE now. A few years ago when I didn't do well at it at VMware, that was a different time. I know who I am now. I know the things that motivate me. I know the things that excite me. And if I found a SE job doing that same thing, like I wouldn't be against that. Um, it's about like understanding the work you're going to be doing. So like figuring out what's next really comes down to like when is next, and then if now, what is the work I'm going to be doing at that other place, right? Is it a new bleeding edge tech that makes sense? Is it not bleeding edge tech, but something that I'm super passionate about? Like, I don't know. Like right now, I'm super happy with what I'm working on. I feel very aligned with what I'm doing. I feel like I'm making a difference at what I'm doing. That's probably honestly, like I've said it a few times now. That's one of the biggest things for me. Cody wants to make a difference. I want to make a difference on the thing I'm doing. I don't want to just be one worker bee moving block A to slot 4. I want to make a difference, and I feel like I'm doing that. Maybe not the most difference, but I'm making a difference, and that's what matters to me.
I I totally understand and hear what you're saying. It sounds like if I listen to what you said, like, during the entire conversation, it sounds like there's a couple other things. Um, things like if you don't feel secure, um, in the organization, regardless of whether it is secure or regardless of how they're treating you or regardless of technology, like that might be a trigger as well. And I feel like, maybe we all have those triggers. And, a big part of it is how we figure that out about ourselves, either to mitigate it or to just accept it, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I think there's a cynical approach to this where you could say, well, the business doesn't really care about how secure you feel. Then maybe I don't want to work for that business. I mean, it sounds very like cutthroat in that way, but like I could definitely see responses from some people being, well, the business doesn't like the business cares about the job you're getting done. Are you getting that job done? Absolutely true. No doubt about that. Then I just don't. But if that's like the number one of it, I don't care. If like I'm super happy at HashiCorp. Anybody who's listening, I'm not leaving anywhere. But if somebody sent me a message on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I read a lot of your content, and I really think that you have a good emotional IQ around you. I'd really like to have you on our team." I would have that conversation 100% of the time out of respect because they recognize that that's the person I want to put forward, right? And they recognize like the emotional aspect of it and the security of that. uh, I think that there's a balance of like the business need and the emotional IQ need, and the businesses that really succeed figure out that balance and figure out how to empower leadership, or not empower leadership to make good business choices while encouraging them to make good people choices too. And it's a super hard balance to achieve. I don't say that lightly, but I mentioned Roy Ridhaller earlier in cloud management at VMware. He is a leader that knows that balance and knows how to tap that balance and knows how to use that balance. Like, and that's why I'll always take a call from Roy. No doubt about it.
Yeah, those are hard jobs that they're doing, and they're making the big bucks to make those hard decisions and to balance those things. So I mean, I think that we should have high expectations of people, so in leadership, right? Lead.
100%. Yeah. And
For
lead
sure.
doesn't lead means a lot of things, right? It's not just, are you hitting your metrics should include how your people are doing. What's your turnover rate? What's your job transfer rate? Like, these should be metrics that leadership are, and frankly, they're not often right now gauged on, right? Like,
Right.
some places gauge leaders on that. I know plenty that don't, though.
Sure.
And like, you should, as a leader, have metrics on how your employees are doing, right? Do you need to be involved in their personal lives and like, how's your day going, sort of thing? But not necessarily. But if your employee, going back to where we started on this journey, if your employee feels insecure in their role, if they're not feeling like they're doing well and they leave that role because of that, I mean, some of that failure is on them for not being able to talk about it and work through it. I hesitate to call it a failure. Like, it's a tough word to like choke on that, but like, you get my point, I think.
Sure.
But some of that's also on the leader for not identifying that, coaching through that, and trying to provide leadership through that.
Awesome. Well, Cody, I think we're about to wrap up here. Any closing thoughts, stuff that we were going to hit and maybe just completely missed that we could get to before we wrap up?
I think the big closing one is like the community aspect of things. The community's been fantastic. Like, I continue to be blown away at the things that have happened in the community towards me in a positive way. And when I was at VMware, I was always the V community, but I've realized that it's just so much bigger than that, and it is just the community in general. And there's so many people out there that can identify with the struggles you're having, that want to be that ear, like, that are available for you, that can make you laugh, that'll let you cry, that'll cry to you, that you can be there for. Like, engage in the community. If nothing else out of this, you'll get the reward of friendship and the reward of a community out of it. It's a great place to be. I wouldn't be anywhere near where I'm at today if it wasn't for my involvement in the community, and the continued attempts to pay that back are why I'm here. So
Yeah, and don't have a Highlander mentality, like you said. It doesn't have to be only one.
no, totally.
There are many. Maybe for some, you're not in a technical community. Maybe it's a social community that's building you up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Cody, thanks a lot for joining us on the Nerd Journey. We hope to have you back sometime. The next great emotional revelation that you have. We'll have you on right away to talk about it.
Yeah, guys, this was awesome. I feel very good from this conversation, so I really appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cody. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, and take it easy.
Okay, how cool and how nerdy are we, John, that we've effectively created an algorithm to debug complex emotional and mental problems on this podcast? I think it's fantastic.
I think it's a stretch to say that we've actually come up with the algorithm to do it, but I think the broad brushstrokes of an outline are there.
Patent pending. It's patent pending, ladies and gentlemen.
Right, we're going to write a book about this. Right, it's complete. None of this is Cody's idea. It's all our idea.
That's right. Yeah.
No credit to Cody D. Arkland. Man, what a great interview he was. Like, it's just, it just, everything he said felt profound and was connecting with me. It was terrific stuff.
Yeah, you can tell he's a pretty reflective person, thinks about what has happened to him, why that is, and really tries to fix the problems that are going on in his life and isn't afraid to face the hard times.
Yeah, I think that along with talking about it a little bit more in public and broadcasting, the process that he's gone through, to benefit, hope that benefits other people. I think, it's just like I said, courageous. And I know that I've benefited from it personally. So if you have too, then where all those great ideas are coming from.
Yeah, definitely reach out to Cody and tell him thank you for sharing these types of things with us, because I know that's not easy. That takes a lot of courage, whoever you are, when you share your dark times with people. But the reason he's doing it is so that people out there won't feel like it doesn't happen to anyone else, because it absolutely does. You just don't see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we should probably think about getting out of here. How about you?
Yeah, it sounds like next is right now. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney, and that's where you should send messages and donations to be part of the John White School of Mentoring.
Yeah. Without an actual Patreon, by the way. No real Patreon going on there. All right. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @VJourneyman, for Nick Cody @NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.